first thing you're going to do is cover your piece of paper with your vine charcoal. And you're using a soft vine charcoal. I'm using the bigger chunk to cover, and then I'm wiping it in with just some toilet paper to smooth it out. And I'm trying to get a nice medium tone over the entire piece. Then I'm drawing the oval of the face. I'm drawing the image over to this side. And you get that basic shape drawn in. And then you're going to measure it. And this measurement is very important. So it was 9 divided by 2 is 4.5. So now at 4.5 inches, you draw a line. That is your eye level. You measure that line, it's 6 inches, you divide it by 5. 6 inches divided by 5 is 1.2. I wrote that number down. You divide that into 5 equal spaces. Then you divide from that line to the bottom of the chin. You divide that in half. That is where the nose will sit on top of. So the nostrils will be located right above that line. Then divide halfway from that line to the bottom of the chin, and that is the line that the mouth will sit on top of. Remember that that is the line the mouth sits on top of. It does not go through the mouth. Again, it does not go through the mouth. The only line that actually goes through everything is the eye line. When we go to draw on the eye, make sure that you don't draw it like a football. You actually look at the shape of the eye. So be very careful. And right now, because we're using the thicker vine charcoal, we're just getting the general shape of it. So be careful getting the shape in. Later on, you'll be able to come in with an eraser and get a lot of little details in. When you're putting in the iris, the colored part of the eye, make sure that it's getting cut off at the top and the bottom right now, because how he's looking straight forward. And when you're drawing these, you're going to be drawing them straight forward. So now I'm looking at spacing. I'm looking at where the eyebrow starts to come in, and I'm looking at that spacing between the lid and the eyebrow. And you remember, you are always drawing what you see. And you can start to chunk in some of the shading that kind of comes around. And doing this with the vine charcoal is a good way to just start chunking things in. And of course, it's going to look kind of blocky right now, but that's okay. Now we can start to get some of the details in with the kneaded eraser. And you can make that into a tiny little point, and you can get really close in and start to get some details. Remember that the eyes are very round because they are an actual ball sitting in your eye socket. So there's going to be shading on that white part of the eye. You got to think about the fact that if this is a ball sitting inside the socket, there's going to be a lot of dark area around the eye. Don't forget your little water line. And that is something that you can kind of come back and forth with a little bit with your kneaded eraser. You're just chunking in and looking for little shapes. These little shapes that you see around the eye are really important. So you're erasing in shapes and you're drawing in shapes. You're just kind of chunking it in. Drawing is, when you're shading, is a lot about shape. You're just looking for all the little differences. And it's constantly about looking at your model. So in this case, I'm doing it from a reference photo. I'm looking at the reference photo. When I'm doing it from a live model, or when you're doing a self-portrait, you're looking at yourself in a mirror. And you're constantly looking at yourself in the mirror. That's the key. There's not any one way to draw eyes except for that you need to make sure that you are looking at the person that you're drawing. If that person is you, you're constantly looking at your own reflection in your mirror. Now going straight down to this line, the nose and sits on top of it. So the nostrils are the one thing, and the wings of the nose are the thing that is the most predominant. Everything else is pretty much shaded. So now I can start to chunk in some of the shapes, the darker and more defined areas. But there's no outlines around the nose. It just has shapes, shapes of light and shapes of dark. So you're starting to erase in some things, draw in some things, erasing out. And starting to chunk in around the eyes and into the cheeks. It's a really definite shape of light that kind of hits on that cheek. Now everybody's going to look different, so it's so important that you are constantly looking at the model, or if it's yourself when you're doing this, you're looking at your mirror and looking for those shapes. I'm drawing that little space underneath the nose, and if you draw a line straight down from the pupil, that's as far out as your mouth can go. Now again, notice this is sitting on top of that line. It is not, that line does not go through the mouth. Make sure that when you get that line going through the mouth, it's not just a straight line. You have to look at the model and you have to notice what that line looks like. Look at the shading on the lips. It's not going to be exactly the same. You'll erase some out and draw some in. I'm going back and forth and just looking for the shapes of lights and darks that I'm seeing. Trimming things off sometimes if it's gone out too far. Looking for shapes. Oh, at this point you can still make so many adjustments. The nice thing about fine charcoal is that you just wipe it away. Notice as I have these things written, all these numbers and lines, they'll just disappear as I kind of go over it. If I draw something incorrectly, you can just wipe it out. So it's almost like a chalkboard. At this point, I notice I have not used any compressed charcoal or charcoal pencils. I don't want to use them yet because I still want to be able to manipulate. And you can get a lot of lights and darks and shapes just with fine charcoal. People have a tendency to move too quickly into trying to get too much detail when right now you're kind of working generally. and you really want to work more general to specific, and you want to be able to change and work and fix things up as you're moving through this. Working in the vine charcoal allows you to do that. So you can make a lot of adjustments still. Now I'm starting to draw in the neck. The neck is almost as wide as the head. A lot of people make that mistake and draw a really thin neck. And the shoulders in this picture are going to go out off the page, because if you take your head and lay it down flat, it's 2 heads wide is how wide the shoulders are. The ears, kind of look at like where they're kind of lining up. I'm starting to just generally mark where they will go in. It's a little strange right now because he has no hair, but we'll start to get that in as well. So now you're looking at like where the hairline is. Kind of some of the hair goes in front of the ear. You're drawing somebody with long hair, sometimes their ears will be completely covered. And you're always just drawing what you see and how you see it. So you can see I'm starting to really chunk things in, laying in big chunks of value. In the neck, it's important to remember that the neck is not just like a can or a cylinder. There is a lot of shape to it, and you need to look for the indents and the darks and the lights. I'm kind of coming in and starting to really look for all these different little shapes that I see everywhere. And so chunking in big areas, and then I'll kind of erase out some big areas as well. Now the hair, you don't see every single strand of hair, and that's really important. So I'm erasing out highlights. Because it's all about chunking in these shapes. I'm trimming down a little bit on the nose because it's a little bit too wide, and at the same time I'm starting to define things. So you're still fixing things up here, and I can use the tortillon or blending stump to blend things a little bit more. And I do a lot of blending just with the vine charcoal and the eraser as well. So with a combination of those 3 things, you can come in and kind of work through this. Even the ear, starting to look for little shapes. I can decide what I want to do with the background. If I want it to be, I could make the entire thing dark. I can make it darker in some places. I'm going to try to decide what I want to do here, and you can always kind of come in and blend it in. Either leave it kind of sketchy or like really finish it up. I'm gonna chunk in some of the shapes in this shirt, and there's these wrinkles, so there's some really dark areas and some really light areas. And you don't want to forget about the shirt because that's important in how it lays. Understanding how fabric folds and how the light kind of hits it, and it's almost like a value scale in some areas where it's going to fade from light to dark. So in the shirt, you're going to be erasing in a lot, you're going to be drawing in a lot. And still kind of going back and forth through the whole thing and fixing things. Come back to the shirt. As I'm working, I'm just noticing little things that need to be fixed. You kind of can come back and forth, so you're kind of working on the whole image at the same time. And still decide if I want to make the figure stand out from the background, I can, if he's lighter, then the background can be darker, or vice versa. So you can kind of change how that goes through the entire image as well. So sometimes I'm using, the eraser, so I'm chunking out bigger areas, and other times I'm chunking out little areas. The nice thing about a kneaded eraser is you can form it into any shape you want and use that as your tool. I think the best thing that charcoal teaches us is to think in terms of shapes, because this relates to so many different medias later. And even if you're drawing digitally, to be chunking in shapes. Notice how much value can be gotten just using the Vine charcoal. You can get pretty darks and lights, and I haven't even used any compressed or white charcoal yet. You do want to erase out the whites really well so that later you can come in with some white charcoal, and you only want to be, when you do that, you will only want to put the white charcoal in areas that have been completely erased, because white charcoal can really actually ruin your drawing, so you have to be very careful about that. I'm almost done here with the Vine charcoal, just kind of giving this finishing touches. Then in the next video I'll show you how I use the charcoal pencils to come in and give some highlights and define specific areas and get just a little bit more detail. Notice that the majority of the drawing's been done just in this Vine charcoal.